We find this later emphasized as well when he's leading the Hebrews in the desert, and he needs to cure them of snake bites. So he erects a staff in the desert with a serpent on it to help cure them of snake bites. And it should be pointed out that Nikola Tesla actually believed that this was really the foundation of his Tesla coil, because the word for copper in Hebrew is nehesh, and the word for serpent in Hebrew is nahash. So copper and serpent were pretty much the same word.
Right.
So if you made a coil out of, just like a serpent will coil itself, if you make a coil out of copper, you could create this Tesla coil. And if you apply electricity to snake venom, the proteins actually separate, and so it's no longer poisonous to a person. So,
wow.
So there was real science there, advanced science. If you accept that theory, as Nikola Tesla did, that goes back to Thoth, and is being preserved in the Torah or the Old Testament, related to Moses himself. So,
right, exactly. You can see the influence there.
Yep.
And isn't that the same symbol still today for medical or for health?
It is, yeah, that's
healing?
exactly right. Yeah, and you find that symbol, by the way, you find that symbol, of course the Greeks utilize it, you find it on the Egyptian temple walls, but you also find it as far away as Mongolia and India and other places in their art and their tapestries, related to the same idea. So it's really, again, we're talking about that universal idea.
Right, exactly.
And I'm sorry, one other thing. When we find it associated with the caduceus, the American Medical Association, of course you have a staff, you have the two serpents going up it to a pinnacle, which then has wings, right? So we're combining the serpents with the wings, right? Or the flying serpent, which is, of course, the same symbol that we find associated with Quetzalcoatl and others in the Americas. So it's a universal idea.
Yeah, universal. And so a lot of this predates even the birth of Michael Doriel, for example. So
completely, yeah, completely, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's going back. I mean, even the Emerald Tablet talks about this idea, the singular Emerald Tablet. One of the first ideas it suggests is as above, so below, right? Well, this is really what's being emphasized symbolically as well between the serpents and the birds, right?
Yeah.
Because the serpent crawls on the ground on the below, and the birds fly on the above, right? So a winged serpent would be a combination of as above, so below, and even Jesus himself said, "Be ye wise as serpents and gentle as doves," right? Again, combination of the above and the below, the serpent and the bird, Right. So it carries over into many different ways.
Right. Incredible. And so some of the alchemical texts describe the Emerald Tablets of Hermes as a key to unlocking the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah.
So now we're getting into alchemy.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about the correlation between those two?
Yeah, completely. I mean, the Philosopher's Stone, of course, was this substance that was said to be able to raise consciousness, heal the body, and transmute base metals into gold, right? And really, in this part of was what Isaac Newton was trying to study, as well as Robert Boyle and Jean Theophilus Desagalliers and Robert Morey and others who were members of the Royal Society. But they according to their tradition, as they outlined it, they believed, and Benjamin Franklin too also was studying this amongst others, but like according to them, the secret salt of alchemy was this monoatomic gold, which could be found on the Egyptian temple walls, as you're familiar with.
Yep.
But you also find it in Indian alchemy, called the Rasayana alchemy, which was the name of alchemy in Egypt, in ancient India, and other places around the world, ancient China. Again, it's universal.
Yeah.
But that secret salt, according to tradition, the philosopher's stone had three parts. It had salt, a sulfur, and a mercury. And the secret salt was this monoatomic gold. And so once you figured out the other two parts, you could combine them in such a way to produce this philosopher's stone,
Right.
which was able to do all these things. That secret salt, however, was also referred to as mana in the Bible. And we find it in Vedic traditions as referred to as Vimana,
Yeah.
which was also associated with flying craft. And we find it in Sumerian myths as Shimana, which was also associated with flying crafts of the Anunnaki. So there's a connection between this mana and levitation. And in the Torah, this mana was stored in the Ark, and the Ark of Covenant, which was guarded by the Levites. And the Ark of the Covenant would have weighed, just based on the amount of gold and everything else on it, would have weighed a couple tons, and yet just a few people could carry it with rods. And so the Levites is probably the origin of the word levitation, where we get levitation from today.
Right. Yeah.
So, and this was also said to be associated with King Solomon's flying ship, which is mentioned in the Kebra-Kanask, which is an Ethiopian text, where it talks about King Solomon used to use this mana for his flying ship, and he would fly from Ethiopia to Jerusalem and back and forth to visit his wife, Queen of Sheba.
Right.
So, and Sheba itself probably comes from Saba,
Stargate.
which means Stargate in ancient Egypt. So it's all kind of connected there, and the Sabaeans, which is another branch out of Ethiopia. Again, they get their name probably from Saba or Sheba, and they've carried on part of this tradition as well. So and it all goes back to the science of Thoth.
Yeah, all of it. It's all related.
It's all related, yeah.
It's all related. And all of this predates Michael Doriel. And the reason why I keep saying Michael Doriel is because there seems to be, at least on some online sources, that some statements made that somebody just sat down in the 1920s and decided to make a sci-fi movie and write the Emerald Tablets. But it's a lot deeper than that.
A lot deeper.
Yeah.
I've even heard it suggested that Doriel was the esoteric name of George Hunt Williamson, who was, this archaeologist who came across this stuff. I mean, Doriel it certainly sounds like an esoteric name, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It does. Yeah. And, one of the things that I've seen with the information in the Emerald Tablets is a lot of the information references science, some of which we didn't discover or rediscover until modern times.
Right.
Into
For sure.
The 1970s, 80s, 90s, maybe some of it, maybe the 40s, but a lot of the science there that's being described, it didn't exist.
Right.
So how do you make up a story based on science that doesn't even exist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And even some of the references to the Thoth, coming across some of the people of Egypt, and passing on his knowledge, and how they were, at first, confused by these ships coming in, and involuntarily falling on their bellies. We find this in Egyptian papyri from the time of Tutmosis III as well, particularly the Thule manuscripts. So, we find references to these things in the ancient world that correspond to what we're finding in the Emerald Tablets, and which gives credence to the idea that they weren't just made up later on.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a historical connection of some kind, and those sciences are the sciences. Could be argued those are the sciences of Atlantis, and that Thoth was I don't know, like a prominent
maybe in a
figure, a leader, or something from that
one
tradition.
of the greatest students, possibly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure, 100%.
Yeah. And his mission was always to bring more knowledge and wisdom and civilization everywhere he went.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
In Egypt, he's represented sometimes as the ibis bird and sometimes as a baboon. And by the way, this is where in the Disney movie The Lion King, the character of Rafiki, who was the baboon, that was Thoth.
Yes.
I mean, and from a secret kind of Masonic connection. Rafiki is always depicted with this cane with these two balls on it, which is where you get the word two-ball cane, right? Who was the in the Bible was the inventor of metallurgy or alchemy, but he was said to be again mastering the science of Hermes or Thoth. Right. So it was the same.
Yeah.
That symbolism gets passed down in interesting ways.
Right. It seems as if Thoth was one of the originators of maybe several, but one of the originators of these ancient mystery teachings.
Yeah.
Long before it was called Egyptian mysteries.
Yeah.
It's these mystery teachings. And that these mystery teachings seem to have only brought in adept initiates to obtain this knowledge and wisdom. But over time, what I found is that when these great leaders and these great ascended masters kind of vanished, disappeared, maybe they died, passed on, or wherever they went, that others who were the recipients of, generations later, the recipients of these teachings kind of broke off and started creating these secret societies.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. One of the ideas associated with the myths of Osiris in the Egyptian tradition is that Osiris, of course, in the myth, he's tricked by his brother Set. He's chopped up into pieces, and Isis ends up reassembling him. That's this very short version of it. But one idea is that Osiris himself actually represented Atlantis, and that when it collapsed, right before it collapsed, there were pockets that were sent out to different parts of the world to try to preserve what was there, and that the reassembling of Osiris is tracking down those pockets of wisdom to bring back together again. Now, Osiris got his authority from Isis, whose name really means throne or seat. So she was like she represented the power, right? The powerhouse. He represented the tradition that was being preserved, the Atlantean tradition. But it was all to preserve the wisdom of Thoth, right? Who was the soul, if you will, of that Atlantean tradition. And so really what we're talking about when we're looking at all these different cultures that are preserving the memory of the wisdom of Thoth, those are the different pieces of the body of Osiris, right?
Right.
So as we bring that back together again and see how they all relate to each other, that's how we're rebuilding Atlantis. We're building the new Atlantis.
Yeah.
And it's to preserve and to utilize this wisdom of Thoth, who in the sciences and the philosophies of Thoth.
Yeah.
And one other example of this, I think that's worth pointing out, is when Thoth is represented as an ibis bird. The ibis bird is known for doing two things. First of all, it's a black, white, and red bird, which were the colors of Egypt. Those were the colors of Atlantis, and those are the colors of alchemy, right? That's the reason why the Templars adopted those colors.
Right.
So, but the ibis bird is known for eating snakes, right?
Yeah.
And a snake was always a symbol of energy or power. So he was ingesting it into himself, the power, that energy. But it's also known for it'll stand on one leg, and it holds the other leg up, and oftentimes it'll hold a pebble or a stone in that leg. And what it'll do is if it starts to fall asleep, it drops the pebble, which wakes it back up again, right? And so in so doing, it's able to remain in a state of not unconsciousness, but not conscious, right? That borderline state where mystical mystical impressions, can come through,
Right.
that deeper aspects of our consciousness. And this is part of what Thoth is talking about, in terms of, that's where we're all connected to that universal consciousnness, is that borderline state. And this is part of that symbolism. That's why he's depicted as an ibis bird,
Yeah.
It's not like he actually was an ibis bird.
Right.
And the last part of that is Osiris, according to the tradition, is raised by Isis and Sekhmet. Of course, Sekhmet's the lioness, right? She's got a lion head.
Yeah.
But she's just like the Sphinx is part person, part lion, right? Yeah. But the idea is it's pointing back to this time period of the age of Leo, the lion, which is, in fact, when the Younger Dryas cataclysm occurred.
Yes.
And which Thoth came out of to rebuild civilization. So all of these all the symbolism and these myths are pointing to actual historical ideas about this root civilization that was destroyed, and then the teachings of Thoth were preserved and need to be refound and re-put back together again, so we can rebuild that Atlantis, create a new Atlantis.
Right.
And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
Through consciousness, it seems as if the teaching of Thoth have, it's almost like what they say in Christianity, the second coming, which is the second coming of the Christ consciousness.
Absolutely. And 100%, that Christ consciousness is that universal consciousness. And to emphasize that point, it should be pointed out that near the Valley of the Kings in Egypt is the area of Nag Hammadi, where the Nag Hammadi scrolls were found. These apocryphal texts associated with early Christianity. Where we find some of the earliest versions of the Christian texts, but we also find them with Hermetic texts. Hermetic texts, associated with Hermes, who was Thoth, were buried. These scrolls were buried with the New Testament scrolls, which just shows that those early Christians, or these early, some believe they were Essenes or others, they were valuing the Hermetic texts, the writings of Thoth, just as much as the writings of Jesus. Yeah. And in fact, there's a lot of crossover between the two, where they're if you look at the Corpus Hermeticum, which is another Hermetic text. It says, Thoth Hermes says, I am mind, I am the word, I am the
Yes.
And all these ideas that you also find Jesus saying. So there was a lot more of a crossover there than most biblical scholars give credit to, because they're not even familiar with these Hermetic writings. Right. They may study the Nag Hammadi library and some of the texts there, but they just kind of ignore the fact that there's also Hermetic writings included in them, and because it's not convenient for their narrative that they're trying to condition people into.
Exactly. Yeah, they just forget about them, or they ignore them. That's the exact great term to use.
Yeah.
And what I saw when I studied the Emerald Tablets was a lot of parallels, like you said, between the New Testament teachings of Jesus and the ancient teachings of Thoth the Atlantean.
Right.
So it begs to ask the question, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And it's like, wow, you can see these teachings permeated all the way into that era.
Yeah, well, when we even find, I just mentioned how Thoth was able to restore Horus's blind eye with his spittle.
Right.
We find in the Christian text Jesus doing the exact same thing. So it clearly comes from these earlier sources. I mean, and we could do a whole show just on the parallels between Jesus and the Egyptian myths. Everything Jesus did, you find in the Egyptian myths. Same with Moses, which is the whole reason why Moses was competing with the Egyptian priests, supposedly doing the same miracles. So it's, but it all goes back to those wisdom teachings of Thoth, and the Egyptians acknowledge that, the ancient Egyptians acknowledge that, and I believe that if Christianity starts to look into that more, it'll add much more flavor to Christianity itself, because and much more meaning to
well, the teachings are powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you follow these teachings, you will become a nice, better person, a loving person. You learn how to love yourself. You learn how to love others. You learn how to uplift and be of service to others.
Right.
And you learn how to build an organized community and try to make the world a better place.
Absolutely. And it's a recognition that we are all one mind.
Yes.
Right?
All is mind.
Even the Emerald Tablet itself says, all things came into being through the meditation of the One. Therefore, we are all part of that one mind.
Yes.
And the more we come to realize, that's where the gnosis is, right? That's where the divine knowledge comes about.
Yeah.
And that Hermes or Thoth also talks about in a number of different texts, including the Corpus Hermeticum.
Yeah.
So, and this is really what Jesus was trying to say when he said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." Well, it's because your neighbor is yourself.
Exactly.
We were all one mind, And
the minds have a saying, "In lakek alakin." I am another you.
So that's right.
I am another you.
I am you. Right.
Yeah. Right.
That's right.
Again, the cultures say the same thing.
Yeah.
All over the world.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Now, there are some accounts of potentially the Emerald Tablets, or a version of them, could be hidden in this Hall of Records, maybe under the Sphinx.
Under the Sphinx, there is a. All we can say there is that there have been. I was upset recently. Mr. Beast just did a thing did a show with
Zahi
Hawass, where they went into the butt of the Sphinx, and there's nothing there, and they're like, "See, look, you can go in the Sphinx, and there's nothing here," which was a pure propaganda piece, because we know there's other entrances into the Sphinx. There's one in the head, one in the back, one in the side, and one supposedly under the right paw.
Videos of me opening and looking in that opening there by the right paw.
Yeah, that's right. And so, and there's been I don't know what the there's been studies where they've been able to determine through different technology that there is something under the right paw.
Hitting radar.
Right, exactly. Ground penetrating radar. There's some sort of cavity under the right paw, and we also know if you walk around the Great Pyramid itself, there are areas where you can actually see passageways going from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid. You could see the roof structure of those passageways. And leading to the Sphinx. According to tradition, there is a hall of records of some kind down there, and that where this information, this Atlantean information, is preserved. Even within mystery traditions like Freemasonry, the Master Mason's grip is also known as the lion's paw. And it's emphasizing this because the idea, the lions, who's the lion? It's the Sphinx,
right?
So the lion's paw would be his right paw, which is, of course, right under that is where we find this hall of records, pointing to this tradition. So, I believe there's a hall of records down there. There were early Templar excavations down there that found something. Alluding to this idea, but now the Egyptian government has it completely closed off, and Zahi Hawass is doing this propaganda piece, even though he's not the head of antiquities anymore.
Right.
But he's become a propaganda piece, it's kind of sad.
Controlling the flow of information.
That's
controlling
right.
the discoveries. Taking claim of discoveries that have been well known and documented for a while, not giving you true credit, and of course obfuscating the truth behind the discoveries and showing, like for example, this thing he did with Mr. Beast. Just kind of really, it's just dogma.
It is.
Yeah.
But there are traditions like the Sabaeans of Haran who still go to which was Turkey, area of Turkey, not far from Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe was originally associated with an Osirian hall of records, is what it was referred to. We know there were Templar excavations there clear back in the 1200s. There's Templar graffiti all around there. And they were trying to track this stuff down, the wisdom of Thoth. And so Göbekli Tepe is another place, which was like one of these preservation centers that was associated with the wisdom of Thoth.
Right.
So again, all seems to be pointing back to the wisdom of this ancient civilization that Thoth was trying to preserve the teachings of. And everybody now has all these different parts around the world have parts of it. We just have to put it back together again.
It's a giant puzzle.
Yeah.
And speaking of Göbekli Tepe, we just came back from Göbekli Tepe in September. Hold on a second. Sorry. Okay. So speaking of Göbekli Tepe, we just came back from there in September. And, when you're there, they try to tell you that the Neolithic people were responsible for building this ancient site, which to me was just, my mind couldn't grasp that people who couldn't build a front door and a window,
right,
and had to climb over the wall to go home at night,
right,
could possibly build this amazing structure which stores all this immense knowledge.
Right.
But that's the story they're going with. But
sure.
But our research tells us different. I'm just happy that they were able to push the date of at least mankind's civilization back from 5,000 or 6,000 years to at least 12,000, 13,000.
Right.
But also, which points to what you talked about earlier, this younger Dryas period of this era where we had this catastrophe in that region, which decimated a lot of things and created this potential regional flood or partly global flood, maybe even a potential full global flood. And the evidence there is that, of course, that place was covered by mud. Now, some researchers and archaeologists, mainstream, say that the mud or the soil that covered Göbekli Tepe isn't even from Göbekli Tepe.
Oh.
Which is really bizarre.
Really
They're saying
bizarre.
that it could be from hundreds of miles away, which means that the mud flow concept or idea, it kind of falls apart a little bit. They're saying that it was purposefully buried. And that would take a lot of resources of a very small civilization to bury Göbekli Tepe, which is a massive area. They've only uncovered a small percentage.
Right. Yeah, like 1/40th, I think.
Right, right. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And so we're thinking like, when you look around the world at a lot of these ancient sites, you begin to see that they seem to have been decommissioned in some strange way. Like the apex of the pyramids taken away. The resonating rods in the Grand Gallery taken away.
Right.
Temples, the architecture broken in a way that they can't function and harness the energy properly. Why do you think, or do you have any idea or hypothesis on why this seems to be a global phenomenon where these decommissioned sites seem to be laying around?
I believe personally that all these sites were originally part of this vast network, right, that were associated with this Atlantean tradition.
Yeah.
And that they were on a world grid where they probably were able to somehow provide basically broadcasted energy that was transmitted to all the different sites. And it used the Earth itself as a generator for that. Between the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon. Yeah. They were able to create this energy. Now, in modern days, we see what happens when you try to provide free energy.
Yeah.
We saw that happen with Tesla and J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan said, well, where do you put the meter?
Yeah.
How are you going to make money off of it? And so if you provide free energy.
Yeah.
So that would be a modern reason why these things would be decommissioned. But I think in the ancient world, you could tell in some instances, they were trying to preserve. They had to have built these things prior to the cataclysm. Mm-hmm. They were trying to preserve it from the cataclysm. Later in ancient Egypt, we know I believe they found a number of these sites, and they tried to preserve it as best they could. I mean, we see that with the Sphinx, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, the first restoration project, when supposedly the Sphinx was discovered. That's really when they did or was built. Yeah. That's really when they did the first restoration projects on it. And we find even some of the temples like Luxor, where we find all these mud bricks that are around it.
Yeah.
That may have come from early preservation efforts. Some people believe that many of the obelisks and other things that we find in Egypt had already been there, and the Egyptians just kind of put their names on it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
They didn't have the technology to do some of this stuff.
No.
So we have to ask ourselves who did, and again it points to this root civilization that were able to do things that we have trouble even doing now.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to the Serapeum, those boxes that are down there. The granite is so hard. How they were even able to carve them out. We would have a tough time even being able to do that today. So certainly the Egyptians with their copper tools couldn't have done it.
I don't think copper tools and chicken bones did the job that they told us.
That's right.
Cool. Copper chisels and chicken bones.
Right.
That can do something as hard as diorite and granite, very high on the Mohs scale of hardness.
That's right.
And speaking of the Serapeum, I take people on tour to Egypt every year.
Yeah.
We just took a big tour there with, as you know, Muhammad Ibrahim and his beautiful wife, Noha.
Yep.
Saba tours. Stargate tours.
Absolutely.
And we go to the Serapeum underground, which I believe, my personal opinion, I didn't read this anywhere, but my personal opinion based on research seems that it's probably a halls of Amenti of one of the halls of Amenti. Watch this video for free at www.4bk.tv. or download the app on your smartphone, Fire Stick app, Samsung TV, Roku, and other app providers.